This is a 1974 Porsche 914, and it's a mid-engine, rear-wheel drive, open-roof Porsche sports car that gets a lot of criticism. People say it's slow, they say it's not a real Porsche. Well, today I'm going to review this car and tell you what I think, and I'll show you all of the quirks and features of the 914. Before I get started, big news, this 914 is currently for sale and it's being auctioned live on Cars and Bids. This is a nice example of a later production 914 in a cool color, in good shape, and you can buy it on Cars and Bids. So, once you finish watching this video, click the link in the description below to visit the live auction for this 914 where you can bid on it and buy it only on Cars and Bids. Alright, time for the quirks and features of the Porsche 914, starting with a little history. This car first went on sale in 1969, and it was co-developed by Porsche and Volkswagen in order to replace two different entry-level models. For Porsche, that was the 912, which was sort of the cheaper entry-level version of the 911. It was getting old, they wanted something else, that was this. For Volkswagen, it was the Carmen Ghia, also getting old, needing replacement. They figured, let's join up and make a car. Now, the actual Volkswagen Porsche backstory to this car is long and kind of complex, and I don't really want to get into all the details here, but in the end, it was agreed that this car would only be sold as a Porsche and not as a Volkswagen. And so it was the Porsche 914, which again came out in 1969. Now, it's this shared development that gets some people talking like this isn't a real Porsche, because even though there was no Volkswagen version and Porsche did a lot of the development, Volkswagen was there too, and so a lot of people say, oh, the 914, well, that's just a Volkswagen. Not technically true, but there's some truth to it. Now, the other complaint that you hear about this car is, well, that it's slow. It's the same complaint that every Porsche gets that isn't the 911. It's not as fast as the 911, not as powerful as the 911, not as exciting, not as thrilling, and that stuff is undeniably true. Throughout this car's entire lifespan, the 911 was the flagship Porsche, and this was merely the entry-level car. And you see that criticism still existing today for models that aren't the 911. They're not a 911, it's a Porsche, but it's not a 911. And indeed, the 914 carried that stigma too. Not helping things was the power output. The vast majority of 914 models, including this one, used a flat 4, a 4-cylinder engine that made between 75 and 100 horsepower, depending on the year, the engine, the configuration. Not exactly set your hair on fire power numbers. Now, Porsche also made a 6-cylinder version of this car called the 914 6, and it swapped out the flat 4 for a flat 6, but even then, horsepower was only around 110 horses. It wasn't exactly the most exciting car, regardless of which one you got. Interestingly, the 4-cylinder was far more popular because of the price point. Porsche sold around 115,000 4-cylinder 914s and only around 3,300 6-cylinder 914s. As a result, the 6-cylinder models are way more in demand and desirable today, even though the power output isn't really all that much stronger. Now, also interestingly, Porsche built two 8-cylinder 914s. They were prototypes, a birthday gift to a member of the Porsche family. They used a flat 8 from racing, which probably really livened up this car, but unfortunately, an 8-cylinder 914 was never put into production by the factory. Now, despite this car's low power output and Volkswagen origins, it does have some real benefits, and undoubtedly the biggest from a performance car perspective is weight. As you can see, this is a little car. It didn't carry much. It only weighed around 2,000 pounds, which was really light even back then, and by today's standards, it's absolutely ridiculous. Incredibly lightweight car. Of course, it also has a mid-mounted engine. Wasn't a huge engine, so weight distribution wasn't as big of a deal as in modern cars, but nonetheless, mid-engine lightweight made for a pretty fun driving experience. And another 914 benefit is that this car is just wonderfully quirky, which is something that a lot of people loved about it then and now. So, with that in mind, let's talk through the quirks. Starting on the outside with the front fenders. This car has these big pronounced front fenders like a 911 did in this era, except in the 911 the fenders ended with the headlights. In this car they end with the turn signals. Instead of headlights there, this car has pop-up headlights, which of course would have been kind of the more fashionable standard of the day in the late 1960s when this came out. That would have been seen as very cool instead of the 911's fixed headlights. Now also up front you can see the rather ugly US market bumpers. I often talk about cars from this era, the 70s going into the early 80s, that had these US market tacked on bumpers to meet regulations, and this is one of the most egregiously bad examples. Just these giant plasticish rubber things sticking there on the front bumper to add more bumper and meet regulations. It's really not a particularly attractive look, but the US Model 914s like this one, they had to have it to be sold here. And it was the same deal in back. You can see rear bumpers just sort of tacked on to the actual bumper, making the car significantly less attractive, but again, complying with US regulations. Next thing you notice is the design of this car is a little bit unusual. It's low and rather flat. And you might be wondering why specifically the upper section is flat, the sort of glass house and the pillars, and the reason is this is a Targa roofed car, meaning that the top can be removed. If it had like a teardrop curvy shape, couldn't really do that, but it's flat, so you can take it off. Remove the top and you can see open air motoring in the 914, which was a nice little sports car benefit. And when you removed the roof, there was enough space in the trunk for you to stow the roof so you could bring it along with you in case you needed to reinstall it if it rained. Now, I know what you're thinking. This tiny little car has a trunk, it has storage compartments large enough to fit that roof? And the answer is yeah. And in fact, not just one storage compartment, one trunk, but two. The first trunk is in back, and you can open it up with the key. You kind of twist the key, push the button, it pops open. You can see actually rather large and flat, as it has to be in order to have enough space to stow the roof. But if you don't have the roof in there, if it's off, removed, or just on the car, you get a pretty decent storage compartment back here, which is pretty cool. And if you want more storage, well, on top of the trunk lid, there's an old school cargo rack. This was pretty common back in this era, the 40s, 50s, 60s. Cars had these things where you could tie down more luggage in case you ran out of space inside the luggage compartment. Now, obviously, as you saw earlier, the trunk shares space back here with the engine. The engine has its own area, so there are separate opening panels back here, but of course the engine is so incredibly small that its area is totally dominated by the trunk, which is significantly larger, as you can see. One thing I like in the rear area of these panels, I love how Porsche is written out across the top of the engine compartment in back, like you would see it on a lot of other Porsche models from this era. On the 911, it would have been written in the back. Here they have it on the engine cover, which is kind of a cool little touch. Now, in case you're wondering about the second cargo compartment, of course that one is up front, and you access it with a little latch in the driver's footwell that actually has a key lock within the latch. And if you would twist this and lock it, then that meant that people couldn't get into your front cargo compartment. Since there is no key lock on the compartment itself, the lock is actually on the latch. But when it's unlocked, you pull that latch like you'd be pulling a hood release for most cars, and then you can get into the front compartment. You can see there's some mechanical stuff in here, but mostly it's just a storage compartment. And the thing I absolutely love about it is that you have this perfectly fitted piece of carpeting just placed here because it's sitting on top of a spare tire. And you have to admit, this car is a pretty impressive miracle of packaging, that they could get a spare tire, two trunks, a roof storage area area and an engine compartment along with a passenger compartment into this tiny, small, lightweight footprint. It's pretty good design overall. And of course, there are many more quirks inside. Getting inside, one thing I absolutely love, a great idea, the driver's door panel, the handle to close the door also doubles as the opening for the storage compartment within the driver's door panel. You can see, stick your hand in here and close it, or stick your hand in here and open the lid, and then you have a storage compartment in there. It's really smart, simple engineering, but it works great. Unfortunately, the passenger does not get this luxury. There is no storage compartment on the passenger side, and you get a regular old handle. Sorry, passenger. And the next thing you notice when you're climbing inside is the parking brake is actually mounted between the driver's door sill and the driver's seat. Sort of an inconvenient place when the parking brake is up, but it works just fine. Now, when the parking brake is up, the warning light for it is pretty crazy. It's in the gauge cluster, and it is massive. It's like 3 inches long, and it blinks. They really don't want you driving with the parking brake on. That's this giant blinking warning light in case the parking brake is left on. And here's an interesting quirk of this car. It blinks at the exact same pace as the turn signal. So you put on the turn signal, and no matter when you put it on or how you time it, the turn signal and the parking brake blinky, they sync up perfectly. Now, speaking of the little turn signal light, you can see it's mounted here in kind of an odd spot. The diagram for it is sort of angled on the tachometer, as is the headlight warning light. They're both sort of interestingly placed into the top of the tachometer, and yeah, angled. They're not actually straight. It's sort of an interesting position, but that's what they've done here in this car. Kind of weird. Also a little bit weird here is the fuel gauge, which you can see down here. Looks like a pretty standard fuel gauge. The weird part is the label for it is the word tank. It doesn't say fuel, it doesn't say fuel remaining or even fuel tank, it just says tank. So if you want to check the tank, well, that's where you go. Now, another interesting quirk, as you can see, this steering wheel has a rather odd design to it. 4 spokes, but they're sort of laid out horizontally across the wheel. And in the center, you have the Porsche crest and a rather large horn pad. Basically, everything here is the horn pad. You press it, and of course, it honks the horn. Also unusual in the vicinity of the steering wheel is the stalks for the turn signals and the wipers, which almost look like blades, sort of like knives. They're kind of sharp, not like that sort of larger plastic stuff that came later. These are metal, and they are small and pointy and certainly interesting, although I will say operating them feels pretty nice. They're very well screwed in there. They work great. They just look a little strange by modern standards. Now, speaking of stuff that looks a little strange by modern standards, the overall dashboard layout of this car is tremendously functional, as you can see. In fact, the entire dashboard is taken up by functional items. Your climate controls, your stereo, your glove box. There's no swoopy lines or added wood or aluminum trim. Nothing is in here to make this car look beautiful. The goal was functionality. Of course, as a designer, you were also dealing with a rather small interior, so you didn't have a lot of space for some of this stuff. You just had to sort of put it where you could. But like a lot of Porsches from this era and even later, it's very much more functional than attractive or cool or beautiful in here. Another interesting quirk, like a lot of cars from this era, actually, there's an explanation of how to turn on the defroster. It says you move the upper levers all the way to the left, you move the lower lever all the way to the right, and that maximizes out your defroster. Cars from this era often did not have one button for defrost. Instead, they had these levers, and they would explain to you which levers you put in which direction to defrost, so you didn't have to try to figure it out on a cold, icy day where you just needed the frost off your window. The interesting part to me, though, is that there is also a separate lever for the defrost right here in the center. It is this giant red lever, and it says defrost on or off. This lever looks like it should be far more important than it is. It looks like an ejector seat, or maybe the parking brake, or some sort of starter. No, it's a giant red lever in the middle of the car, and it turns on the defroster. Assuming you have all the other levers in the right place, it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Now, also in the center control stack, you can see down the bottom half you have gauge gauges here, which are arranged kind of haphazardly. The upper right, there's a clock, and the middle left, the temperature, and at the bottom right, your voltmeter. They're not in a line or like some sort of square pod. Instead, they're just kind of tacked on there randomly, but it works. You can see them again. It's relatively functional. Also in here, of course, you have an ashtray, and it's hidden in kind of a cool place right here. This leather panel sort of integrated into the dashboard. You can pull it open and reveal the ashtray and do your smoking as you would have in 1970s Germany, or you can close the ashtray and then it relatively well seals up and stays hidden in this interior. Kind of cool. Other items worth noting in here, you have a manual transmission, of course. All 914s had a manual, and it's a dog leg manual, meaning that first is down and to the left rather than up and to the left like so many other cars. That's something you got to pay attention to because up and to the left is reverse, and you don't want to accidentally go into reverse. Thankfully, there's a lockout. You have to like push it further over before you can get reverse, so you won't make that mistake. Also in the center, you can see there's an armrest here, although it's very low. You wouldn't really rest your arms, but it does work for that purpose if you want. And if you lift it up, you can see there's another little storage compartment here. I suppose this one would be for the passenger since they didn't get one on their door panel. Also interesting and notable in here, you can see between the seats you have the dome light, which is mounted here, of course, because the roof is removable. So on the actual dome itself, you don't have space for a light, and so they stick it here instead. Other interesting items in this vicinity, how about the coat hangers? Even in a 914, an open roof two-seat car without room for coat hangers, they've added them in because that's just what you do in Germany. You need a place to hang your suit or your pants or whatever you just got from the dry cleaning, and so they provide it on both sides. Also back here worth pointing out is removing the top, which is actually fairly easy. You can see there's latches in the front. They're pretty simple. You just unlatch them. Same sort of deal in the back. Also a latch back here that you have to do. There's basically one on all four corners of the roof, and once you've finished with that, you can just lift it out and stow it in the trunk if you want to, or just leave it out of the car and drive carefree and open in your little Porsche Roadster. And before I take a drive in this Porsche Roadster, one last interesting thing about this car, you might be wondering what happened? What happened after the 914? Where did Porsche go from here? Well, this car was sold through 1976, after which it was replaced by the 924, which was a front-engine sports car, also at the entry level, and coincidentally also co-developed with Volkswagen, another car they were going to sell, but instead it became a Porsche. The 924 became the 944, which became the 968, and that lasted all the way through the mid-90s until it was replaced by the Boxster, which of course eventually added the Cayman. And so you can follow the entry-level Porsche lineage all the way from the current Boxster and Cayman models all the way back to the 914, decades of entry-level Porsches that got criticized because they weren't as good as the 911. Anyway, with all of that in mind, those are your quirks and features of the 914, and now it's time to get behind the wheel, get it out on the road, and see how it drives. Let's do it. All right, driving the 914. Never driven a 914 before, and I gotta say, first few minutes driving it, I'm kind of charmed by this car. This little silly car. Obviously, it comes with the stigma of being, you know, the not Porsche, this little entry-level four-cylinder, no power Porsche that, you know, was really just a Volkswagen, right? And so you come at it with that, but then you get in and I don't know, it actually feels okay. You know, one thing about Porsche is, even in this era, they were just engineering cars in a way that was a lot better than a lot of other automakers. And that's also true when you get into a Mercedes-Benz from this era. You realize like how America got so far behind. You get into a Buick from this era and you're like, this is so bad by comparison. But this car is usable and drivable, and even though it's 50 years old, it feels pretty, you know, usable. Honestly, that's exactly how I put it. Like, it starts right up. It doesn't have stupid creaks and rattles. You're not fumbling with a bunch of unlabeled stupid switches that don't make any sense. Like, this car is a car, and it drives reasonably, and it's easy to use, and it's nice. And there's even a surprising amount of space in here for me, a pretty tall guy, which shocks me considering how small this car is and the reputation that it has for being small, lightweight, and just really tight inside. It's also actually kind of fun to drive. There is nobody on the planet, I don't think, who would consider this to be a fast car. Certainly not me, but it is like an eager car. Is it fast? Well, here we go, we're flooring it. No. No, it's really not fast. Woo! Honestly, moving at this pace, it actually feels exciting, even though it isn't really a fast car. Like, this is kind of fun. It's kind of neat to be going at this pace. And that's kind of the thing that was fun about this car, is that it was a fun little tossable car, even though it wasn't the fastest car or the most exciting car. You know, Jay Leno always tells the story, back in the 60s and 70s, you could buy a Porsche with 150 horsepower or an American car with 400 horsepower. Why would anyone buy a Porsche? Well, you get it when you get inside the car, and you feel kind of the sophistication, the level of engineering, the quality that these cars have, which American cars just replaced by ramming in huge powertrains. And these cars, they needed a little bit more finesse, but they rewarded you with like this lovely experience. I mean, this car feels sturdy and stable and flat on the ground and relatively robust, even in spite of the fact that it's a tiny car from 50 years ago. And that is what good engineering does. As for the way it handles, I actually really like it. I think it's a pretty impressive car to drive. You know, it doesn't have power steering, and it's a light car, so you're really doing all the work. Now, at straight ahead on center, it's vaguer than you'd want it to be, unfortunately. But when you actually get going, and when you're going hard around actual corners, there's nice weight to the steering. And of course, the car, because it's so light and because it's mid-engine, has great balance. You're really in control of the car, and it's very predictable and kind of corners exactly where you'd expect it to, despite that on-center vagueness. It's relatively eager, but you are dropping it on the floor a lot to not go very fast. Nonetheless, this is a fun car, and it drives well, and it feels stable, and it's exciting, and it's cute, and it's cool, and it's really not all that expensive. These cars never really got over their stigma of being sort of the entry Porsche, and so you can have a fun vintage Porsche kind of classic car experience for not crazy money, and really drive around in a well-engineered, well-built car and enjoy it. And honestly, it's pretty cool to do. Like, I actually think that this car is fun. I think it's cool. I think, yes, you have to work for the power, and it's not the fastest thing around, but it has a cool experience. You know, power is so easy to get these days, but a classic car experience with a cool sounding engine and an old school interior and nice weighted steering, that's hard to get, and this car delivers it despite being, you know, the cheap one, the low power one, the entry level one, the Volkswagen one. It's still kind of the cool one. And so that's the Porsche 914. Yes, this car is slow, and its origins may have you questioning if it really is a real Porsche, but this is a charming car that's fun to drive. It's exciting, it's well engineered, and it provides a vintage, cool, classic car experience that nothing made today can match. And it can be yours on Cars and Bids. Anyway, now it's time to give this 914 a DougScore. And the DougScore is here, 40 out of 100. I rarely review cars as old as the 914, but it holds its own here against some sporty cars from the next decade, which gives you an idea of how relatively solid and advanced it feels for a 1970s car. It's slow, and the interior is cramped for sure, and you'll never escape the stigma of not really a Porsche and the cheap one. But this is still a charming, enjoyable car that really surprised me in how nice it is to drive.